Sarah's new apartment seemed perfect. Spacious, affordable, in a quiet neighborhood nestled on the outskirts of town. After weeks of searching and countless disappointments, she finally found a place that felt like home. The realtor, a nervous man with darting eyes, had mentioned its unique character and rich history, but Sarah hadn't given it much thought. She was just happy to have a space of her own, away from noisy roommates and prying parents. The day she moved in was filled with promise. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming the hardwood floors. Sarah imagined cozy nights curled up with a book, peaceful mornings sipping coffee, maybe even dinner parties with friends. This was a fresh start, a chance to reinvent herself. On her first night, exhausted from moving, Sarah fell into a deep sleep. But at 3:17 a.m., she jolted awake, heart pounding against her ribs. A sound had pierced her dreams, a faint, desperate whisper coming from inside the walls. "Help me," it breathed, barely audible yet impossibly clear. Goosebumps prickled her skin. Sarah pressed her ear against the cool plaster. Silence enveloped her, broken only by her ragged breathing. She waited, straining to hear, but the voice didn't return. Minutes ticked by, and Sarah's rational mind began to reassert itself. It must have been a dream, she thought, or perhaps the wind playing tricks. Come morning, bathed in cheerful sunlight, Sarah convinced herself it was just a product of stress in an unfamiliar environment. She threw herself into unpacking, determined to make the apartment feel like home. Each box opened, each picture hung on the wall felt like claiming the space as her own. But as night fell, a creeping unease returned. Sarah found herself avoiding certain corners of the apartment, her eyes drawn to the walls as if expecting them to move. She left the TV on as she fell asleep, hoping the background noise would drown out any disturbances. It didn't help. Each night, the whisper returned. Sometimes it was barely audible, a sigh at the edge of hearing. Other times it seemed to echo through the entire room, impossible to localize. Always the same plaintive plea. "Please, help me." The voice was genderless, ageless, yet tinged with a desperation that made Sarah's chest tighten. She began to dread the night, lying awake for hours, waiting for the inevitable whisper. During the day, she was jumpy, startled at every creak and groan of the old building. After a week of sleepless nights, Sarah called her landlord. Her voice shook as she described the nightly disturbance, trying to sound rational despite the fantastical nature of her complaint. The landlord, initially sympathetic, grew increasingly dismissive as she spoke. He suggested it might be pipe settling or mice in the walls, common issues in older buildings. When Sarah pressed, insisting it was a voice, he grew curt, reminding her of the building's strict no alterations policy and hinting that over-imaginative tenants weren't welcome. Frustrated and increasingly frightened, Sarah considered moving out. She even went so far as to browse apartment listings online. But something held her back. The voice seemed so familiar. It tugged at her memory, like a half-forgotten dream or a childhood friend's name on the tip of her tongue. And beneath her fear, a growing sense of obligation took root. Whatever, whoever was in the walls needed her help. How could she abandon them? Sarah began to investigate, tapping on different sections of the wall, listening for changes in the sound. She scoured the internet for the building's history, finding only vague mentions of its age and past renovations. One night, fueled by desperation and lack of sleep, she even tried to communicate with the voice. "Who are you?" she called out, feeling foolish yet hopeful. "What do you need?" But the only response was the same whispered plea. "Help me." Weeks passed, and Sarah's obsession grew. Dark circles formed under her eyes, her work suffered, and friends stopped calling after one too many canceled plans. But she couldn't let it go. The voice had become a constant companion, even when silent. She found herself talking to it during the day, explaining her theories, promising she would find a way to help. Her apartment slowly transformed. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, tracking where the voice seemed strongest. Books on local history and paranormal phenomena piled up on every surface. Sarah knew how it would look to an outsider, but she was beyond caring. She was close to an answer. She could feel it. One sleepless night, as a storm raged outside, Sarah traced the sound to a patch of wall that felt different, slightly warmer with an odd give to it. Heart racing, she retrieved the hammer she'd bought just in case, along with a flashlight and a small first aid kit. Whatever she found, she wanted to be prepared. "I'm here," she whispered, raising the hammer. "I'm gonna help you. Please, don't be afraid." With a resounding crack that seemed to shake the entire building, she smashed through the plaster. Dust billowed and Sarah coughed, waving it away as she peered into the wall cavity. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing only cobwebs, decaying insulation, and a small, ornate mirror. Its silver surface was cracked and tarnished, but even in its damaged state, Sarah could see it was beautiful, antique, perhaps even valuable. Hands trembling, Sarah reached in and lifted the mirror. It was heavier than she expected and cold to the touch despite the warmth of the wall. As she turned it over, examining the intricate frame, her blood ran cold. In its reflection, she saw herself, but not as she was now. This Sarah was trapped, eyes wide with terror, silently screaming and pounding against the glass. The image flickered like a glitch in reality, showing glimpses of the same face growing older, more haggard, more desperate. The whisper came again, this time from behind her, no longer muffled by the walls. "Thank you for letting me out." Sarah whirled around, the mirror slipping from her grasp and shattering on the floor. In the doorway stood herself, but wrong. Older, gaunt, with eyes that held no light. This other Sarah wore clothes Sarah recognized from her own closet, but they hung loosely on her emaciated frame. As Sarah opened her mouth to scream, she felt a violent tugging sensation. The world blurred, colors swirling and melting together. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring out from behind the glass, watching her doppelganger smile with her face. Sarah pounded against the invisible barrier, screaming silently, her cries trapped in the mirror's void. "Don't worry," the thing wearing Sarah's face said, in a voice that was hers but not hers. "Someone will hear you eventually. It only took me 30 years. The doppelganger's smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. "Time passes differently in there. You'll see. But don't lose hope. After all, you solved the puzzle much faster than I did. Perhaps the next person will be even quicker." Sarah watched in horror as her double began tidying up the apartment, humming tunelessly. It paused by the shattered mirror, considering the fragments. "I suppose I should clean this up," it mused, "but maybe I'll leave a piece or two to give the next person a fighting chance." It winked at Sarah's reflection. It's only fair, after all. This game has rules. As the creature moved away, Sarah felt herself being pulled deeper into the mirror's endless void. Her new reality settled around her like a shroud. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to her core, that her whispers would soon join the chorus in the walls. And somewhere out in the world, wearing her face and living her life, a monster waited for the next unsuspecting tenant. But Sarah knew that she herself had now become that monster. Sarah gathered what remained of her strength and focused all her will into a single, desperate plea. "Help me."